Today's story is from Mark in the New Testament, and we have to remember a couple of things about a story told in this fashion. The first is that our characters don't all have faces, so you have to imagine what this little disciple looks like. And also the scale doesn't matter so much. So this little disciple could hang out with a hound dog this big. That doesn't really work, but in your imagination you can make it work. So however in your brain it makes a good picture, do that. And then the next thing is just that we always bring the story to us with a song. Bible, Bible, tell your story, speak to us about God's glory. There's so much we need to know. Tell us how God loves us so. In this story, Jesus is hanging out with the disciples, and he tells them that he knows what his future is going to be. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and he's going to undergo suffering, and he's going to be rejected by the elders of his religion. The scribes, the priests, all those with great knowledge are going to reject him. He's going to be killed. And then after 3 days, he will rise and show us all a vision of heaven. Peter hears this. Peter, his best friend, and takes him aside. And the word used in the Bible is rebuke. In other words, he says, no, don't do that. Peter says, don't go there. If you can avoid that, if you can avoid the shaming, the suffering, the death, do it. Walk the other way. Because Peter is his dear friend. And Jesus said, Satan, get thee behind me. In some versions where we hear this, he says, Satan, get thee behind me. But I don't think that's how he says it. I think this is one of the saddest moments in his story. Last week, he pushed away temptations of all kinds, self-doubt, power, money, all sorts of temptations. But this is really the last temptation, and this is the worst. To turn away from a fate that means leaving his friends and his loved ones behind. That's the hardest of all. He goes on to tell them all that if they want to follow him, they have to be ready to give up everything to follow. That the reward is in heaven. The reward is not here on earth. That's the end of our story. What's the takeaway? What are the takeaways? Well, there's a parallel story. Our other reading for this week is in the Old Testament, and it's Abraham's story. And Abraham is told by God that he will be the father of nations. He's told that his future will live on forever. In a way, Jesus is telling us that his future will also live on forever. His message will outlive him, but it requires a death, and it requires a resurrection. That's the downside of being Jesus, and maybe of being his follower. Does he turn away from life itself? No, he's been fully engaged in life. He's been fully living it. If you don't know what temptation is like when one of our hound dogs smells defrosting meat on the counter and sniffs it to find it and then thinks about trying to get it. He knows he shouldn't, but he wants to. I think this may have been a moment when Jesus thought, oh, how sweet it would be to stay with my friends, to stay with my loved ones. But I can't. The message has to go on. The message is bigger than the man. And aren't we glad he brought that message to us? Bible, Bible, tell your story, speak to us about God's glory. There's so much we need to know. Tell us how God loves us so.